Chapter 26. Despite the leap forward that the nursing course represented, there was trouble brewing, again, of the substance abuse variety. Moving back to the city for school and being away from my family's watchful gaze had brought me back in touch with my old drug scene. I was attending the drug and alcohol counselling that was part of my treatment plan, but it wasn't helping much. My family, doctor and psych nurse were united in their conviction that I needed to stay well away from cannabis and anyone smoking it. The alcohol and drug counsellor had different ideas. Welcome to the harm reduction theory. Let's talk about this for a moment. Harm reduction is a nationwide strategy delivered in New Zealand by the various district health boards through their alcohol and other drug services. It was developed in response to the often poor uptake of the abstinence model by people with substance abuse problems. Cynics have observed that the shift in strategy was to create outcomes that would justify the service's continued funding. After all, they weren't worth much if hardly anyone was getting and staying clean. But if you could document that young Johnny had cut down his pot intake from 4 tinnies a week to 3, that was a measure of progress. The idea with harm reduction is that if you can't get someone to stop abusing alcohol and drugs, at least you can teach them how to do it in a way that reduces the harm and fallout from their behaviour. An example of this theory in practice is New Zealand's methadone program, where opiate addicts are dispensed methadone, a synthetic opiate, in a controlled amount and environment. The underpinning notion is that this procedure stops the addict having to commit crimes to feed their habit and allows health services to keep a track of them. In theory, it makes sense. In reality, getting on the methadone program is considered the holy grail by most drug addicts, free drugs on a daily basis. I have known quite a few people on the methadone program, most of them using other drugs as well and still carrying on with their generally lawless lives, but hey, it looks better on paper. Really, the major problem with the harm reduction model is the vast discrepancy between how it looks and sounds in theory, which has a certain logic to it, and the mixed messages it sends in practice. I loved the harm reduction model. It was music to my ears, having endured the relentless pressure of the last 2 years to give up drugs altogether. I couldn't believe my good fortune to be told by the AOD counsellor that if giving up was all too hard, then I should learn how to use drugs in a way that didn't get me in as much trouble. For example, if smoking cannabis was playing havoc with my lungs, I should bake it in cookies instead and eat them rather than smoke the weed. Cool, okay, note to self, try that more often. That counsellor, he was my soulmate. He even told me that he had a quiet joint from time to time and it didn't cause him any grief. I took all his advice to heart and twisted it with my own fuzzy logic. I decided that from here on in, I was just going to accept the fact that I was a cannabis addict, stop fighting it, focus instead on maintaining my addiction at a constant level so I didn't have to suffer the undue harm of being straight for any length of time. I decided, though, that as part of my harm reduction regime, I wouldn't mess with other drugs. I could see how the whole mushroom thing had been a very bad idea, and I sure didn't want to endure consequences like that again. So I told myself I'd just stick to dope, maybe a bit of alcohol every now and again, and of course my medication. Nothing else, though. This should, I reasoned, contain my addiction and allow me to have some control over it. The counsellor would surely be pleased I had heeded his words. Note to alcohol and drug counsellors: telling an addict that it's okay to use a little bit of drugs falls into the category of bad ideas. To borrow a phrase from the Narcotics Anonymous recovery program, 1 is too many and 1,000 never enough. But it's only a bit of dope, right? That natural and by implication harmless weed. And it's a herb. Aren't herbs supposed to be good for you? Why, you can even make clothes from the fibres. The illicit activity of smoking marijuana that so many of us have claimed is a victimless crime, surely its prohibition is simply a moral stance. I mean, after all, everybody's doing it, aren't they? Even the alcohol and drug counsellors. The veneer of social acceptability accorded cannabis gave me a lot of ammunition against the party poopers, but I knew that it wouldn't wash with my family, so I kept my resumption of dope smoking largely to myself, with the exception of the other people I smoked with and sourced my supply from. I needed them. For the next 7 years, I was to maintain this double life all over again. On the one hand, I was a successful scholar doing well academically on the nursing course, keeping up appearances. On the other, I was still the same old tireless pot smoker, spending almost every dollar and every moment that I wasn't at lectures or studying on the getting and using of my favourite herbal friend.